Okay, so I'm Kristen, and I got to study food in Istanbul, Turkey with the Duke of Istanbul program. So when I first arrived in Istanbul, I was immediately overwhelmed by how different everything was. Between the language barrier and the bustling streets and the local street vendors, I really began to realize how far away from home I really was. I've always spent my time in the Midwest, so going to Istanbul was just such a change of pace for me. But as I continued to explore the city streets of Istanbul, I was struck by a number of more familiar things that I didn't quite expect to see there. Primarily McDonald's, Starbucks, TGI Fridays, KFC, and Pizza Hut. So I began to wonder how these American restaurants were affecting the Turkish food preferences and, as a result, the social culture surrounding food. So 3 points that I immediately considered when going about my research was the geographical position of Turkey. Istanbul is situated right at the intersection of Asia and Europe, with the Bosphorus literally as a physical barrier between the two continents. So I was wondering how maybe their past as a receptive kind of cultural transaction area might have affected their present-day abilities to cope with cultural change. And their history. After World War II, the government actually enforced a bunch of modernization policies to try to get the world to see Istanbul and Turkey as a whole as a more progressive, modern city. So they actually had things like the hat law, where men weren't allowed to wear fezzes anymore and were forced to wear bowler hats, and just all of these things to try to modernize them. So maybe this past as a country very focused on modernization, maybe they were more likely to adopt these fast food customs. But also, kind of to refute that, nationalism. They have a very strong sense of nationalism. They're very proud to be Turks. There are Turkish flags flying everywhere. Ataturk, the founder of Turkey pretty much, is seen in photos all around the country, and they're very proud to be Turks. So maybe they're actually more likely to reject these fast foods. So just I kind of already said that. But here are just some pictures. The bottom left is a sinitçiler, which is a man who goes up and down the streets carrying his morning simits every day, shouting to people who are waking up maybe on their way to work to buy simits on the way to work. And next to it is a fish market, and there were tons of these small-scale, specialized markets throughout all of Turkey. So basically, the research. I decided to go about this by interviewing Turkish students at the university in which I was studying, which was a very Americanized university. Everybody spoke English. They were all taking classes that were taught in English, and many of them had actually spent time in the United States. So I thought maybe this would be a good sample of Americanized Turkish students who might actually be more likely to eat American food. So I interviewed them with a questionnaire that had questions ranging from list your 5 favorite foods, to your cooking abilities, to your social habits that surround your eating, like who you eat with and how long your meals last. And then I gave them a list of about 40 or 50 Turkish and American foods and asked them to list whether they thought it was Turkish or American, or how much they liked it on a scale of 1 to 5, and how much they preferred to eat it. So basically, I was doing that to see if there was some sort of relationship between Turkish foods and foods that they liked. And I did find that they were actually they still preferred Turkish food over American food, refreshingly enough. So 71% of students indicated that their favorite foods were still Turkish foods. And 73% of the participants responded that they were able to make their favorite foods at home, which included a range of foods from baklava and manto, which take a lot of time and preparation and are very hard to make, so you need a lot of skills. And then 68% of the respondents chose that Turkish restaurants were their favorite places to dine out. So even when they did do some more Western eating outside of their kitchen, they would oftentimes choose Turkish restaurants over American restaurants. And also, just a side note, about 70% of the students that I interviewed actually listed just vegetables as some of their favorite foods, like spinach or broccoli or eggplant, which I think you'd be hard-pressed to find American students who would list such things as their favorite foods. So this is actually more just for the picture. If you can see at the bottom, there's actually a Burger King right next to all of the doner and the durum stands on the bottom right. So yes, they still maintain a preference for Turkish food over American food. The length of the meals with family and friends was something that I also observed time and again. The restaurants were very happy to have you stay for as long as you wanted. They never tried to rush you out the door. They would bring you endless supplies of free tea after your food, almost inviting you to stay for as long as you wanted and continue your conversation with your friends and family. So the local food knowledge and the ability to cook Turkish dishes is still very prevalent in Turkish culture. And they still have a good connection with the people who sell and produce their food because there are no large grocery stores. They oftentimes go and have a real relationship with the market and the vendors. It's like going to a farmer's market every time you shop. And also just about the regional differences, these are some photos. The bottom left is actually some fried cornbread and a regional cheese dish that was very specific to the Black Sea region, and you could find it nowhere else in all of Turkey. And then the bottom right is actually some old Ottoman dishes and a resurgence of pride in Ottoman culture, which they tried to move away from after World War II, is coming back and is at many of the popular restaurants. And here's some more Ottoman cuisine, and on the bottom right is manta, which is like lamb ravioli covered in yogurt sauce. And so my conclusion, basically upon coming back to America, I was overwhelmed with the grocery stores. My first trip back to a grocery store was probably as overwhelming as my first few minutes and hours in Istanbul because there were fluorescent lights and packaged food, and I couldn't talk to vendors or get free samples if I wanted to. So it was just very hard to kind of reacclimate into American food culture. And I actually spent a lot of time at the Grinnell farmers market this summer after coming back so that I could actually have a relationship with the people selling me my food again. And it was the closest to Istanbul that I felt upon returning to America. I think that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you.